The rise of fascism in Europe, what we still need to learn. Welcome to today's episode. We're taking a hard look at one of the most dangerous political forces of the 20th century, fascism. It didn't emerge overnight, and it wasn't confined to one country. In the turbulent years between World War I and World War II, fascist movements gained momentum across Europe, ultimately seizing power in Italy, Germany, and Spain. At the center of these movements were men whose names have become synonymous with dictatorship and terror: Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, and Francisco Franco. But fascism didn't just rise because of economic collapse or national humiliation. It rose because it exploited fear, frustration, and disillusionment. It promised simple answers to complex problems: national rebirth, economic recovery, and the restoration of lost pride. And it often did so wrapped in flags, backed by violence, and disguised as patriotic salvation. Millions of people, in moments of desperation, chose fascist leaders not because they were forced to, but because they believed in them. That's one of the hardest lessons history offers, that tyranny often enters with applause, not boots. Today, as we witness a global rise in authoritarian rhetoric, democratic backsliding, polarized societies, and attacks on the free press, the warnings from the 20th century feel alarmingly current. Fascism doesn't always look the same. It evolves, adapts, and speaks in new tones, but its patterns are familiar: strongman leadership, scapegoating, the erosion of institutions, and the targeting of truth. Point 1. Fascism defined power, nationalism, and control. Before we explore how it spread, we need to understand what fascism is. Unlike liberal democracy or communism, fascism is harder to pin down with a single definition, but its key traits are unmistakable. Ultranationalism. Fascism glorifies the nation above all else, often rooted in ethnic or racial superiority. Authoritarianism. It rejects democratic institutions and values a strong, singular leader. Militarism and violence. Fascists see war and violence as tools of national renewal. Anti-communism and anti-liberalism. Fascism despises both socialist revolution and parliamentary democracy. Mass mobilization through propaganda, rallies, and media control. Fascist regimes manipulate public opinion to enforce loyalty. Fascist leaders promise to restore greatness, discipline, and order in times of chaos. But behind the slogans was a terrifying commitment to total control, suppression of dissent, and the dehumanization of opponents. Fascism flourished where people were afraid, divided, and disillusioned, a warning sign that remains as true today as it was in the 1920s and 30s. 2. Mussolini. The blueprint in Italy. Benito Mussolini was the first to bring fascism to power, rising in Italy after World War I. Italy had been on the winning side of the war, but it felt betrayed by the peace treaties. Economic instability, strikes, inflation, and political paralysis created a sense of crisis. Mussolini capitalized on this chaos. A former socialist turned nationalist, he founded the Fascist Party in 1919 and organized the Black Shirts, paramilitary squads that beat up leftists and intimidated opponents. In 1922, Mussolini staged the March on Rome, a show of force that convinced the king to appoint him prime minister. From there, he dismantled democratic institutions and built a one-party state. Censorship and propaganda became tools of control. Opposition parties were banned. Mussolini declared, "All within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state." Italy under Mussolini set the template: use democratic mechanisms to seize power, then destroy democracy from within. 3. Hitler. Ideology turned genocide. Inspired by Mussolini, Adolf Hitler took fascism to a far more extreme and catastrophic level in Germany. Germany, too, was reeling after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles had left it economically crippled, politically unstable, and humiliated. Hitler's Nazi Party emerged in the 1920s, preaching a dangerous mix of racial purity, anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and revenge. In 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor and quickly moved to eliminate opposition after the Reichstag fire. Within months, he had become a dictator. Like Mussolini, he banned opposition parties, censored the press, and used mass propaganda to unite the people under Nazi ideology. But Hitler's fascism was also driven by race-based ideology. Jews, Slavs, Roma, disabled people, and others were labeled as enemies of the state. The Nuremberg laws institutionalized racial discrimination. The Gestapo and SS enforced fear and obedience. Ultimately, Hitler's regime would orchestrate the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. Under Hitler, fascism wasn't just authoritarian, it became genocidal. 4. Franco, fascism in civil war in Spain. The rise of fascism took a unique path, not through elections or political appointments, but through a bloody civil war that tore the country apart. By the mid-1930s, Spain was a deeply divided nation. On one side stood the Republican government, a fragile coalition of leftists, socialists, communists, and anarchists, committed to reforming Spain's monarchy, land ownership, and church dominance. On the other side were the nationalists, a conservative, militaristic alliance of monarchists, landowners, the Catholic Church, and elements of the Spanish army. In 1936, a group of right-wing generals launched a coup against the Republic, igniting the Spanish Civil War. The most prominent among them was General Francisco Franco, who quickly became the nationalist leader. Franco received major support from Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy, both eager to test weapons, tactics, and ideology in a proxy war. Their backing, including planes, tanks, and troops, helped turn the tide in Franco's favor. The infamous bombing of Guernica in 1937 by German aircraft became a symbol of fascist terror and was immortalized by Pablo Picasso's haunting painting. After 3 years of brutal fighting and atrocities on both sides, the nationalists defeated the Republic in 1939, and Franco established a dictatorship that would last until his death in 1975. Though Franco's Spain didn't fully mirror the racial obsessions of Hitler's regime, his government was unmistakably fascist in character. Political opponents were executed, imprisoned, or exiled. Press freedom was abolished, all media became tools of state propaganda. Regional identities, such as Catalan and Basque, were violently suppressed. Languages other than Castilian Spanish were banned in public life. The regime emphasized Catholic nationalism, military hierarchy, and absolute loyalty to the state. Spain remained officially neutral during World War II, but Franco's authoritarian rule plunged the country into decades of repression, cultural erasure, and economic stagnation. While many European fascist regimes collapsed in 1945, Franco's dictatorship endured, surviving into the Cold War era, a stark reminder that authoritarianism can persist long after the world's attention has shifted elsewhere.